Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another live stream, and thank you so much for tuning in for another show. A lot has happened today. I posted a video earlier on about the summary of the third day of talks, and clearly things have moved forward and very, very quickly to a level where the American president declared the following. I am very proud to announce that Israel and Hamas have both signed off on the first phase of our peace plan. This means all the hostages will be released very soon, and Israel will withdraw their troops to an agreed upon line as the first step towards a strong, durable, and everlasting peace. All parties will be treated fairly. This is a great day for the Arab and Muslim world, Israel, all surrounding nations, and the United States of America. And we thank the mediators from Qatar, Egypt, and Turkey who backed or who worked with us to make this historic and unprecedented event happen. Blessed are the peacemakers. What do we know? Okay, so if you haven't watched my previous video about the third day talks, a lot of it has advanced on this day. Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner arrived, Turkish Minister of Intelligence, the PFLP and the PIJ, or the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, which are the two, or some of the two, the PIJ is second, largest resistance movements in Gaza after Hamas came. A lot of talk, of course, during the day, and during the day as well, Donald Trump, he had a statement following which he was approached by Marco Rubio in that statement, in that briefing, and he handed him this piece of paper. And that piece of paper was later found out to be, well, this declaration that he has to be the first one who announces this ceasefire agreement. But what do we understand? Well, from Trump's statements, and we're going to go through the other statements as well, and what Israel said and what's to be expected here. Well, clearly first phase. We're not talking about the second and the third phase. It's going to take steps, not something that's going to happen all of a sudden. That was clearly unrealistic, to say the least. As a matter of fact, Hamas now confirms that at least a third of the dead prisoners of war that Israel killed during this campaign will not be found in the initial phase. This is something that could mean that some of the bodies would be in areas that Israel is still present in at the moment. Benjamin Netanyahu, of course, there's going to be an initial withdrawal from Israel, and then later following withdrawals, because he's saying this is phase one out of the peace plan. Benjamin Netanyahu would find it easier to pass this first phase through his cabinet. He's going to publish this for approval. They're going to have a meeting in Israel. They're most likely going to approve it. That is unless, there's one thing that might not work, by the way. There would be alternatives to pass that, but something might be an obstacle for Benjamin Netanyahu to pass this agreement, even as a first phase, and even with a confirmation that all of the prisoners of war are going to be released, which is, there was a statement made by one of the Israeli officials saying that Israel only now said that they have a red line in relation to the prisoners, the Palestinian prisoners who will be released, and that is those who took place on the 7th of October, those who participated on the 7th of October. And what do we understand from this statement? That means we have a confirmation that the Palestinian side previously said we're going to eliminate the veto of Israel in relation to the names of the Palestinian prisoners who will be released. So they said Israel will not have a right to dictate who goes out and who remains in prisons. Israel now saying it's only those participating in the attack of Al-Aqsa flood. That means they don't have a problem in releasing Marwan al-Barghouthi, Ahmad Saadat, Abbas al-Sayyid, and Abdullah al-Barghouthi. These are names that Israel previously had a veto on. That's something that's probably going to cause a big problem in the cabinet meeting. Then, in relation to the names of those who fought on October the 7th, well, they already confirmed that they will be releasing people who they imprisoned following October the 7th. And Israel might be saying that as a stunt, because again, it's unlikely that the Palestinian side will not be asking for their release or even their release at a later stage. From a Palestinian perspective, they're asking even for the bodies. For example, they asked for the bodies of Yahya Sinwar to be returned as well, something that Israel also did not agree upon. Israel saying that it's only those who participated on October the 7th means that they're confirming that the others, they have no problem with them. We're talking about people with the heaviest sentences, not necessarily serving for the longest time, although some of them are, because the Palestinian resistance releases Palestinian prisoners or demands the release of those who spent more, or those with the, so they will be released initially, and then those who have the longest sentences. And some of them, one of them has the longest sentence in history, I believe, over 6,000 years. And clearly that's something that they went ahead with. But Benjamin Netanyahu, he might not have to release these names during the cabinet meeting tomorrow, because usually whenever a Palestinian prisoners are released, the list that Israel confirms only gets published within 24 hours of the release. Therefore, Netanyahu could tomorrow today tell his cabinet members that, listen, it's not going to include this and that, but later on that's going to be the case. And Israel does that primarily so that there wouldn't be any legal challenges. Because usually, if Israel wants to release someone who was in the Palestinian resistance, for example, who spent, for example, 2 decades in prison, the families of those Israeli victims, for example, of an attack conducted, can come up with a challenge. They can go to the courts and they can say, we refuse this deal. Now, usually that never succeeded in history. And the reason that Israel does that is to eliminate any chances of people going to court, taking Benjamin Netanyahu to court or the Israeli government to court for the release of these people. So that's one thing over there. And of course, in relation to the Palestinian prisoners, by the way, that's a big issue for Israel. Israel takes the release of Palestinian prisoners very seriously. They have been torturing. Over 70 were martyred in Israeli prisons because of starvation and torture, deliberately killing them, slow death. They get released like skeletons, not because of a deliberate starvation campaign that they're conducting in Gaza, for example, because they deliberately starve them when they can give them whatever they need. Another post was published by Dr. Majid Al-Ansari from Qatar. He said this on X. He said that the mediators announced an agreement was reached tonight on all terms and mechanisms for implementing the first phase of the Gaza ceasefire agreement, which will lead to stopping the war, releasing Israeli detainees and Palestinian prisoners, and allowing aid to enter. The details will be released later. There were images, of course, coming from that meeting as well, and it showed the Palestinian side seeming pleased from what happened in that meeting. These were some of the images that were published from that meeting of the Palestinian delegation after it took place, following some more images that came of the participating delegations from Turkey, from Egypt, and from other countries as well. So we are talking about a first phase. What to expect after this first phase and what's going to happen after it? Can Israel backtrack in the last second and do the same thing that it has done before? There were many cases where, well, we were very close to a ceasefire. We entered the ceasefire, Israel broke it. There were many problems happening. First and foremost, there's always an element of risk when you deal with Israel and when you deal with the United States administration. Israel has always been treacherous. The United States administration always backed Israel. And there is always that risk that Benjamin Netanyahu would withdraw in the last second or come up with certain problems or sticks that he can put in the wheels to prevent the ceasefire from happening. However, and in the previous video I mentioned with the summary of the third day of talks, there were talks about the maneuverability of Benjamin Netanyahu. That maneuverability is usually granted by the United States administration. If Donald Trump gives Netanyahu maneuverability, he'll have maneuverability. If he doesn't, then he doesn't. The report said that Donald Trump told Netanyahu at one point last week that if he does not go into these peace talks, we're going to leave you. Now, the United States telling Israel we're going to leave you, that's basically a death sentence. Israel is a fake entity, a dying entity that constantly has this ventilation from the United States. If the United States leaves them, they're going to be dead. They have no chance of survival. If Donald Trump truly did that, that would be a reason that Benjamin Netanyahu would go ahead. And as a matter of fact, certain statements that happened and were published actually by Benjamin Netanyahu, and even some people who are very close to him on a harder line, like Smotrich, for example, said that they need to consider what the United States wants as their biggest supporter. The question is, of course, how far does the United States administration go in the implementation? Not that by any way, shape, or form, by the way, the credit for this goes to Donald Trump. Donald Trump wants his Nobel Peace Prize. And it would be a huge... I mean, the Nobel Peace Prize is already something that's condemned anyway with its historical moves, by the way. But if he receives it now, it's going to be a joke. And there is no credit here for the United States, by the way. The credit is for the brave and heroic people of Gaza, for the brave and heroic people who resisted this aggression and this genocide and this barbarism when they were left alone and neglected by all of the official powers, almost globally, apart from, of course, a few brave nations and movements who supported them, and not relating that, of course, to the global population, because what we have is a global revolution and a global movement that isn't going to stop with any sort of ceasefire, and mustn't actually stop with any ceasefire or plan as long as it may take, because all of the reasons that this genocide happened still exist. And the American administration, by and assuming that it's going to be imposed eventually, imposing a ceasefire agreement, they're providing Israel with a rope here, by the way, because they were leading themselves into oblivion regardless. Now, what is Benjamin Netanyahu going to do with this agreement, and how far is he going to go with it? Is the Palestinian side going to be fooled? Is it a deception? Is it a deception coming from Benjamin Netanyahu? What if the prisoners of war are released, for example, and Israel says, well, we're not going to release anyone, and that is it? Which is it's a question that everyone will be asking. Well, what if the prisoners of war get released and the Palestinian side doesn't have anything? Well, number one, we still don't know details about the mechanism. That's first and foremost. There are certain details in this agreement that we do not know. As a matter of fact, the majority of it. How, the time frame, is there going to be a mutual release with the time that the Israeli prisoners of war are going to be released? Will there be a release from the other side? Is the Palestinian side going to release all of the prisoners of war and then wait for Israel, which would be a much more vulnerable position? We don't know any of that, and that hasn't been published. Now, chances are the Palestinians, and it would make more sense to have mutual exchanges simultaneously. If that's the case, that would protect at least the release of the Palestinian prisoners with the prisoners of war. And also they clearly said that some of them will be in Gaza up until they find them, which means they're going to be waiting for the final Israeli soldier to leave the Gaza Strip. That's in relation to the prisoners of war. Then there are certain things that are going to happen immediately. Well, a ceasefire, Israel will stop all of its hostile actions in Gaza, certain no-fly zones for for a time frame during the day, and there will be aid going into the Gaza Strip immediately. Reports said that approximately 400 trucks a day are going to get into the Gaza Strip in the initial phase, and following that, the numbers may be increasing. However, one of the most important things that need to be known very clearly is that this is a first phase of what Trump is calling a peace plan, and what the Qatari delegation has said is a long-term peace, or a long-term stopping of the war. So we heard these terms coming from the American side and from the delegation participants. We didn't hear that from Benjamin Netanyahu. Benjamin Netanyahu said the following: a great day for Israel. Tomorrow I'll convene the government to approve the agreement and bring all our dear hostages. I thank the heroic soldiers of the IDF and all the security forces, thanks to whose courage and sacrifice we have reached this day. Thank from the depths of my heart President Trump and his team for their mobilization for the sacred mission of releasing the hostages. Okay. Netanyahu, of course, he forgot to say one thing. All of them were killed during and October the 7th only because of me, and I could have stopped it from day one, but I didn't for my own interest. He forgot that bit somewhere along the lines. But Netanyahu didn't mention anything about ending the war. That would be partially due to him wanting to pass this agreement. He wouldn't want to kind of say, I'm going to end the war and I'm going to do this and that. Because how he's trying to sell that to his right-wing depraved terrorists in his government is by telling them they are going to be released, but we're going to be staying in Gaza. So that's the formula to sell it to Ben Gvir and Smotrich, who up until now are not saying they're going to leave the government, but Ben Gvir threatened he's going to leave the government if it goes ahead in a certain manner. Mind you, by the way, Israel already had certain concessions that they're like either underplaying or hiding deliberately. For example, the ethnic cleansing campaign, that's done. The Palestinians are remaining on their land. Number two, the fact that they did not say that they will enter an agreement before Hamas unconditionally surrenders. Netanyahu wanted to eliminate Hamas. Let's not forget all of these things. The fact that Donald Trump now is saying, I'm talking with Hamas, it's going really well, that's a huge success for the Palestinian resistance, who stayed there despite this barbaric aggression from Israel, backed fully by the United States, and the heroism of the Palestinian resistance on the ground and the Palestinian people. Now, the main thing, of course, is the relief that is required for the Palestinian people. There were multiple videos inside the Gaza Strip where people were celebrating, and they were clearly very happy to see the reports about the ending, or at least the ceasefire agreement. Hopefully that will lead to an ending of the war and the genocide. Now, there are lots of questions that will remain open. The questions that will remain open are, what are the time frames for this? We still don't know exactly from any side how long will the first phase take. Are there certain time limits for the release of the prisoners of war, as said by Donald Trump? Well, we know by now that that's not going to be the case. When are they going to enter supposedly the second phase or the third phase? and what will happen after that. Now, from what we know so far, the Palestinian side said that they're not going to be entering anything so long as there are no guarantees. Did they get those guarantees already? We really don't know. Or are they not releasing them deliberately so that they can let this phase pass, and then move on to the next phase? Then details to do with the rebuilding. We saw already, okay, we heard that 400 to 500 trucks will be entering a day. There's going to be a lot of work on the relief side for the people of Gaza, health-wise, mentally, aid, everything. Although, I mean, these people showed unbelievable resilience. They were continuing to study, for example, during the genocide in their tents. Some of them were accepted to international universities during a genocide. Can you believe that? These are people who love life. These are people who have plans in their life, and they don't let anything stop them. But of course, there needs to be a guarantee for the long term. Was that already provided and still not being stated so that this can pass? A lot of questions. What are the assurances that Benjamin Netanyahu is not going to find any sort of excuse to wage another war? There are a couple of arguments here. Well, firstly, if, let's say, Israel receives the prisoners of war, or at least the living ones, and whatever the Palestinians can find in terms of dead ones that Israel butchered, like they butchered their own people on October the 7th, and then later on targeted them in Gaza so they don't have to pay a price. Let's say they take them. What is the Israeli excuse after that? There's a consensus, even amongst the American administration and all of the mediators, the same countries that Donald Trump thanked, that they want a long-term peace, that they want a deal, that they want all of these things. What will be the excuse for Benjamin Netanyahu to wage war again? The Hamas arms, for example? How strong will that argument be, seeing as Benjamin Netanyahu doesn't even have an argument with prisoners of war inside of the Gaza Strip? He lost all credibility because they killed them and they targeted them, and they could have had them from day one. This move, this Al-Aqsa flood, started initially because Israel was refusing prisoner exchange for 10 years. There were 4 Israelis in Gaza since 2014, by the way. Then this happened because Israel was abusing them and killing them in prisons and all of that. They told Israel, listen, we'll enter an agreement with you. You'll have all of them back tomorrow just to release all of our prisoners. Netanyahu refused. Why? Because clearly there was a bigger plan. There was this occupation and resettlement plan. There was this new Middle East plan. All of these delusions are evaporating in the face of the war criminal, Benjamin Netanyahu, and all of those who had the delusions of greater Israel. All of these evaporated completely. That's not going to happen. Why? Because they were beaten in Gaza, despite all of this barbarism and destruction. So there is an agreement. It's official, in summary, in short. And there are many questions. What we do know is that both sides signed it. Even the president might go to Egypt in the next few days. He didn't even rule out visiting Gaza, Donald Trump. There are certain assurances and guarantees that haven't been published yet. There are certain mechanisms that we still don't know because they haven't been published yet. Certain leaks are happening every day. This is the first phase out of multiple phases that, according to the American president, will lead to an everlasting peace, and according to the Qatari officials, are going to lead to the ending of the war. Will it work this time? The next few days, of course, we'll continue monitoring the situation on the ground, see what other confirmations there are. The talks are going to continue because clearly this is a first phase and there are other phases to come. Therefore, they need to continue talking about the next phases. That's something important. But again, Trump probably wanted to have an approval of this initial phase, although he wanted an all-out deal according to his peace plan immediately, which clearly didn't happen because of his obsession with this Nobel Peace Prize. However, all of the mediators, they need to stay there. They're going to have to stay there to talk about the following phases. What's going to happen after? How long will that take? Up until there is a genuine declaration of the ending of the war. Now, one thing that is important here, all of that, especially the in relation to ending the war, by the way, the ending of the war could be something that is already approved, but just not made public. And they're selling it as a first phase. Again, despite the possibility of everything being ripped to pieces, that's always a possibility because we have a genocidal entity and a war criminal leading it. Let's not forget that. That is bearing in mind that the United States as a country and as an administration, they have interests and they weigh out these interests. How long will this benefit me for? And when is it time to stop? Where can I benefit more? Is it with real peace and prosperity or with continued destruction? Or is it a tactical move where we would stop it for now, recover, support Israel, work on improving Israel's image, which is impossible, by the way, it's not going to happen, and then potentially wage another war? There are lots of questions. So this isn't the be-all and end-all. It's just the first phase. And hopefully in the next few days, we'll get more information. And of course, I'll keep you updated with all of the details and developments as soon as they happen. Again, I had this live stream because this happened literally after I posted the video about third day summary. So that's why I had this video, this live stream now. Tomorrow, of course, either a video or a live stream, depending on really the situation itself. But, you know, with the last couple of days, so much is out like by the minute, and you need to wrap up everything. But we'll wrap it up here for tonight, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you, Kime and Alan. Thank you very much for your super, everyone for participating in the chat. I'll hopefully be with you tomorrow. In the meantime, everyone stay blessed, take care, and I will see you soon in the next video. Peace, everyone. Salam.